for the world's most powerful governments and for the nuclear power industry, not to mention the public at large, as the full implications of the Fukushima nuclear crisis are becoming clearer. Resource-poor Japan itself now relies on the nuclear option for 1/3 of its power, a vital part of its economic lifeblood. And South Korea is even more reliant. China has a medium-term goal of 15% nuclear power. India is also on the nuclear road. And emerging countries like Vietnam and Indonesia are planning a partly nuclear future. America has more than 100 nuclear reactors, most of them 3 decades or more old. But after a long hiatus, America is now talking about more nuclear power, not less. Europe is heavily committed, with 30% on average coming from nuclear. In France, it's nearly 80%. Meanwhile, the environmental movement remains largely anti-nuclear, despite the argument that nuclear has to be part of an effective solution to global warming. So there have been a lot of vitally interested spectators around the world watching this drama unfold. John Carlson is one of them. For 21 years, he headed the Australian Safeguards and Non-Proliferation Office and chaired the International Atomic Energy Agency's advisory group on safeguards for 5 years. He's now a counsellor with the Washington-based Nuclear Threat Initiative and a visiting fellow with the Lowy Institute. I spoke with him from our Washington studio earlier today. John Carlson, what is your worst fear scenario related to civilian run or nuclear power plants run for civilian purposes?
I think we've just about seen it, Kerry. I can't imagine anything worse happening. People think back to the Chernobyl accident, and a number of commentators were predicting that this would be like Chernobyl. The technologies are just so different, and the driver for releasing large amounts of radiation simply isn't there with light water reactors. So I think basically we've seen the worst scenario, and it's turned out to be not the nightmare that many people thought it could be. That's certainly not to be complacent, and clearly there's going to be a lot of work analysing what happened and learning and improving safety systems. But I think basically the technology has shown itself to be very robust.
Really? You can say that? Robust, given the pictures we've seen, the explosions that took place?
Well, you have to look at it in terms of two things. First of all, what was the actual impact on public safety? And secondly, I think in any kind of analysis we do of nuclear energy, we have to compare it with other energy sources and the risks and benefits and limitations of other energy sources. I think if you look at nuclear energy purely in isolation, you would probably conclude maybe it's best not to use it. But the fact is there's no perfect way of generating electricity, and we have to take an objective look at pros and cons on a comparative basis.
Even if the environmental exposure to radiation turns out not to be serious in this case, Fukushima does still throw up significant questions, doesn't it? Not least the policing of standards at nuclear power stations around the world, most of them run for profit.
Any government with a nuclear industry will be looking very closely at the lessons, and one of the issues is regulation good enough, and is there a case for having more international involvement? One of the characteristics of nuclear safety is that it's very much regarded as a national responsibility. There's an international convention, there are international standards, there's quite a number of mechanisms for cooperation and experience sharing and peer review and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's a national responsibility. I think maybe it's time to think a bit more about that.
We've just recently witnessed the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster, where an independent presidential inquiry found that BP had put money before safety. Why would you expect the nuclear industry to be any different where the profit motive is at stake? It's true, isn't it, that the bad practice of one company or of even a government could potentially lead to a nuclear calamity?
I think that's very true, and I wouldn't pin that on the profit motive. I'd agree with you that where there is a profit motive, there may be a temptation by some to cut corners. I think what really matters is who are the people who are actually operating the industry, what kind of training have they had, and particularly what kind of oversight do they get. I think you need a very strong regulatory system, whether it's a company that's running a facility or whether it's the government that's running a facility.
Can you understand why public trust might be shaky when even a friend of Japan's, like the United States, was questioning whether we were being told the whole truth of what was going on at Fukushima, where even the Japanese Prime Minister seemed to be less in the loop than one might have expected?
I think, in fairness to the Japanese, they were overwhelmed by a series of catastrophes, and this was an unprecedented event, the impact on a nuclear plant. A number of areas of the plant would have been off limits to staff because of high radiation levels. I think for quite a period, nobody had any way of knowing what was going on. It wasn't so much that information was being withheld, but the information simply wasn't there. Clearly, we have to develop better ways of knowing what is happening if we ever have a repeat of this kind of accident situation.
There is an irony, I guess, isn't there, that as the rest of the world now reviews its nuclear future in the wake of Fukushima, Japan is now so dependent on nuclear power, it will keep expanding its reliance on nuclear with its whole economic future at stake. Can Japan be trusted to be objective about what happened at Fukushima?
Kerry, I think nuclear energy will have to be a part of the energy mix in a wide range of countries for a number of reasons that have not gone away post-Fukushima. We have to do better at protecting against the potential harmful effects, but it's something that if we want to address issues like climate change effectively, we can't exclude it. As to whether the Japanese can be trusted, I think that's a harsh question, although I can understand that a lot of people might be asking it. And I think that really points towards, is there a way that we should have more international involvement in national programs so that there's a better way of building confidence and building transparency in decisions that are taken and the way things are done.
John Carlson, thank you very much for talking with us.
It's a pleasure, Kerry.
And that's the program for tonight. Next week on Four Corners, we bring you a gripping forensic account of the mid-air explosion on QF 32 off Singapore. Until then, good night.